Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well on this Monday, August the 2nd. A little bit of a warm one out there, so I'm glad to be sitting inside in air conditioning today. A lot of worse things that we could be doing. Just wanted to jump on here, and it won't be a very long live. I know I've said that before and, went on forever. But this shouldn't be a very long conversation, but I did want to kind of come in here and talk about a question that I'm getting asked quite a bit. And it deals with the vaccine mandates in the private sector, specifically in workplaces. But it kind of goes into some other areas as well. And we'll kind of jump into that here in just a minute. Hey, April, how are you doing? And apologize a little bit. Normally, I get on and do these Facebook Lives a little bit more often, but for the last couple of weeks, I as most of you who know me personally know, I've been dealing with pneumonia. So I didn't want to get on here and sound like Doc Holliday from, with coughing every other breath and not having enough voice to even speak. So I opted to just not do Facebook Lives for a few weeks to let my lungs recover a little bit from the illness. But I'm back, and hopefully we'll be able to make it through this no problems. But speaking of illnesses, I guess this is the topic that seems to be on a lot of people's minds, and the reason I say that is I've had probably a dozen people reach out to me since Friday. Asking me in some various form or shape, different specifics, but some various form or shape, whether or not a vaccine mandate could be issued by an employer requiring you to have a COVID-19 vaccine for employment purposes. So I think it's in the news a lot. I know it's in the news a lot. It's just a lot of people's minds. But I think also what's kind of prompting people to reach out right now is I think we're starting to see some local businesses doing this. And so it has people worried. It has people concerned, and they want to know. Do I have to? Can they make me? And so I've been getting various forms of that. So let's talk. And again, I'll preface here at the very beginning. As is normally the case, I'm going to talk about the legal perspective here. Okay, I'm not going to talk about necessarily personally as much, although that always kind of creeps into it. But this is more about the legal aspect of it, legally speaking. So let's talk about that and give kind of some short answers. As is always the case with the law, there's a lot of gray area, a lot of room for debate. That's why there's attorneys like me who can look into that. And again, as I often do when I'm tackling these legal specific issues, understand I'm not going to give you legal advice here today. That would require us to sit and talk about your specific situation, your specific employer, and whether or not this does or does not apply to you. I'm going to talk in broad strokes, just friends sitting here on Facebook talking. So again, this is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, just give me a call or give another attorney a call. So let's talk about it. Can an employer require you to be vaccinated, COVID-19 or otherwise, but let's talk about COVID-19 as a term of the employment? The short answer is yes. In U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, different hospitals, colleges, universities, private businesses all over this country have begun doing that, and so that again prompts a question. In May 28th of this year, which is not that long ago, it seems like forever ago, but it really isn't that long ago, the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission put out a statement stating that that in fact an employer could require COVID-19 vaccination as a condition of employment. It's for a lot of people that really shocked them, and I talked with a lot of my friends and who were very concerned by this and very shocked by this. I will tell you, a lot of people like myself who've studied the United States law history, the history of our laws in this country, it doesn't surprise us at all. This is one of those things that we've had on the books for years and years. Decades, century. So it's well established in the United States, and again, just because it's well established doesn't necessarily mean it's right. It's just what it is, and I think a lot of people didn't necessarily realize this, and are now very concerned by it, thinking that it's something new. But the first state-forced vaccines in the United States was in 1809. 1809 in Massachusetts was the first time that the state required individuals to be vaccinated, forced and mandated, and whatever term we want to use. And you could go back to the smallpox vaccine era, and you talk about barbaric. There's accounts and recordings of people being held down and literally forced vaccines. So that was back in 1809. I'm sorry. U.S. Supreme Court finally received a challenge back in like 1855, and this was kind of the landmark case of the time. It's called Jacobson v. Massachusetts, where the United States Supreme Court weighed in and said, yeah, we agree. The states are allowed to require and mandate vaccines. Then we saw in 1922 there was a challenge to whether or not children could be required to be vaccinated for school. That they're required to, and that was kind of a very kind of novel challenge, because what they were challenging then was saying it's a right for these children to go to school, and you can't deprive them of that right to go to school based upon their vaccine status. So in 1922, Zucht v. King, how about that for a name? Zucht versus King decision. They said they can require it to be done. So while in modern times, we've some states, I think it's like 40. What is this? Let me look up here real fast. It's like 48 states allow some kind of exemption for either religious or philosophic means. The courts have not been friendly on this issue at all for people who are privacy advocates or as such. They've not been friendly at all. Matter of fact, even with these exemptions, the courts have held that there's no constitutional right to an exemption, even for religious or philosophic means. So there's it's a lot of jurisprudence, a lot of court history backing up the state's ability. The state, when I'm saying state, I'm not necessarily meaning Tennessee. I mean state as in the big state, the capital S state, the government. Having the right to, when they have what's called a compelling interest in the health care of the society and the country as a whole, to be able to mandate things such as vaccines. And that goes and translates into the private sector primarily. Now, there are some exceptions to when and in this, back in that Zucht v. King, it was the Supreme Court that said, these ordinances, they don't convey a arbitrary power, but only that broad discretionary power required by the government in order to protect public health. That was kind of the ruling language that they used. So when we get to private sectors, in private sectors, again, having historically having the right to be able to do that, and EEOC backing that up here recently. There are some exceptions to that, and then we're not talking necessarily about the exemptions of the states and such. They may have those as well. There are some, have to be within the guidelines of like disabilities acts and things of that nature. So there are some examples in there, but the courts traditionally up to now have held that, as a term of employment or condition of employment, it's okay for an employer to say, you need to be drug tested. You need to have a physical examination. You need to have a psychological evaluation before we hire you, or as a condition of your employment. And the courts up to now has held that vaccines are no different than that. Now, we may argue that they're different. I'm just simply saying that that's what the courts have held. So, historically, legally speaking, have the courts upheld the right of private sector businesses, employers, to require as a term of employment that somebody be vaccinated? Yes, they have. So, we don't have a lot of legal framework and precedents to back up an argument that hey, it's a privacy right, or it's a health right, or it's a religious right, or it's a lot of other due process right. All of those have been challenged and kind of fallen flat on the courts. So what do we do then, as your employer says, I work for XYZ or Acme Company, and Acme Company says, hey, Brett, we want you vaccinated. You're, as part of our business, we see it as a business interest. You interact with customers, or we want to be able to maintain our schedules, and we want you to be vaccinated. Or they could either flat out say, I want you vaccinated, or if you're not vaccinated, you have to wear a mask. And, as long as it doesn't violate one of those, disabilities acts things, then, the courts are probably going to uphold and say that it's within their power to do so as a private business. Okay, so that's the law, kind of where we are and what we're seeing going on. I think we're going to see it more in the future, and I think this is going to become, maybe a new challenge. But again, the courts don't seem to be too friendly with it as far as historical perspective. That doesn't mean that going forward they won't change their mind. But I guess my advice, and people ask, well, then what am I supposed to do? Well, I mean, in the short term, we all need jobs. We need money. We need money to pay the rent and buy food and put shoes on our feet. So I guess you come down to a point of either complying with the business's requirements, going in and having a face-to-face conversation to see if there's any leeway on what you can do other than being vaccinated, if that concerns you, or find other employment. And that's kind of, the position that we're left in, which is, if somebody who doesn't want to be vaccinated, that's a tough spot to be in, so that's where we are. I mean, if there's specific questions, I'd be glad to answer them. And as always, you can message me. I'll follow the thread on here. But like I was saying in the very beginning, I've had lots and lots of people reach out to me, and I think all of a sudden everybody reaching out to me from like Thursday evening through the weekend, I think it's because some specific local businesses have begun starting to require vaccinations, and several people were surprised by it, and also going back to we talk about hospitals and such. There's a hospital in Texas where this was challenged by the nurses there, and the courts ruled against them. Matter of fact, it didn't get anywhere. It got to like the first leg where you can have a case dismissed, and it got dismissed, and the court said there's no grounds here. You can't. If your employer wants you to be vaccinated, then that's just the way it is. And as a term of your employment, you need to do that. So that was the result here. I guess it was a couple months ago. I did a little Facebook post on it, so I'm sure it's out there somewhere. But that's what we found. If you have specific questions, reach out to me, and we'll go forward on it. Like I said, not my personal opinion. I'm not really here giving my personal opinion. They're a dime a dozen. My personal opinion ain't worth much weight, I don't guess, other than to me. But this is just a conversation about the legal precedents and what the courts have done and not done, whether or not a private business has the right in the United States to require medical, I guess, specifics, like a vaccine as a term of employment. And the short answer is yes, barring some other restrictions such as Disabilities Acts and some other ones that would kind of step in, that if in very, very rare circumstances, and it wouldn't be one of those where you could just say, oh, well, I've got an exemption. Again, the courts haven't favored the exemptions either. So that's where we are. I always, and I'll be honest, philosophically, I'm always torn. I absolutely hate it when individuals are being told to do things that that are against their will, especially when it's the government requiring it. I don't think that's, it's the role of government for the most part. I know there are always circumstances, but when the private, sector begins to, weigh in, it's kind of tough because we need those jobs. I mean, those jobs are required. I mean, we can't just give up our job, and go without money. It's just not the day and age that we live in. So, Michelle's asking what proof must be shown if someone says it's against the religion. Well, first of all, I don't know that stands up in private sector mandates of employment. I don't know that stands up. The courts have said that there is no freedom, kind of a constitutional right to have an exemption, whether that's philosophic or religious. I don't know that that's successful to be argued. However, doesn't mean that a business couldn't say, we're going to make a religious exemption. And then, of course, since they're giving additional, exemptions that's not necessarily required, then they would set the terms. So they would set the terms as far as what you have to prove. Maybe they just take you at your word. Maybe they don't. Some, I know schools in the past, and this is not COVID-19 exemptions, but previous exemptions with vaccinations, they've had an actual document you had to sign, swearing or affirming that, it is in fact a violation. Stephanie McCowan Stamps is saying state employees and federal employees, you're going to see it with federal employees before you see it with most private sectors. I think we're beginning to see that already. U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs was the absolute first to step up and say that they require it. I think you're going to see it department by department through the federal government. And could the state do the same? Absolutely, the state could do the same. Now, I'm not saying that they are. I'm saying some have in the federal. I'm not saying I don't see any of that going on in our state, in the state of Tennessee. Other states have. California, they have. But could they do it? Stephanie, I think that's the question you're asking. We talked about private sector, but could the public sector do it? Absolutely. Public sector has actually enacted more vaccine mandates in the past historically than private sector has. And again, especially if you go back to smallpox era, they would literally go door to door and round people up and force them to be vaccinated. So the state has definitely shown that they have a propensity in the past, and we're talking hundreds of years ago. I don't think we'd see that today. I'm not trying to scare anybody. I don't think we would see that today. I think you would see something different. But that is how strong the U.S. courts have allowed those kind of mandates to be. So yes, I definitely think could be there. Any other quick questions before we settle up? Like I said, I just happened to be here on my lunch break after court today, and I thought, well, I've got my voice back and my oxygen back enough to be able to, I think, do this. So let's get on here and answer this question a little bit. Yeah, Paul is saying when I was a Department of Defense employee at the Air Force Base, you couldn't get in without a flu vaccine. Absolutely. I mean, we've seen that. We've seen schools. I mean, and again, if we look at it, I mean, COVID-19 is new and it's scary, and I get that. But historically, I mean, I couldn't go to high school, without having my vaccine shots. And vaccine shots when I went to the military. I had vaccine shots when I went to school. When I traveled overseas for my private employer, went to Brazil, 12 different times, and I had to have shots, before going. So it's just because it's new. That's that this isn't new. Again, on that, I know people who drive trucks that have to have health, certificates, and I know people who work in law enforcement had to have psychological evaluations as part of that. You're talking about intrusive, but that's allowed and such, and so. That's that again. This is new and therefore scary and different, but it's only new because it's COVID-19. I think because we have all seen this. People my age, we all were vaccinated and had to be and go to school, and then there were some exemptions in things, but that's not always there. Sean, good news. I mean, it is good news. It's just scary news. I'm not saying it's bad news. I'm just saying it's scary news. And I think I don't ever underestimate the psychological impact when you are being forced to do something that you're not ready to do yet. And maybe someday you get there. Maybe sometime you get there. And I know it's healthy. We don't have, all the time in the world, but I'd much rather see people being allowed to make their own decisions. I know that that's sometimes fairy tale land. It's not always the way it is. It's just me. That's just my kind of libertarian, views of society and, not wanting the government to, impose its will on me or even private sector. But, that's just me personally. I'm not saying this is necessarily bad news. I'm not saying it's new news. Actually, I going back to the 1800s. I mean, this is just how we've done it in this country. You're welcome, Michelle. I'm always glad to put this information out there. And April. So, and it's a little bit risky, I'll tell you. This is a topic that I debated even talking about because, it gets personal for people and it gets political for people. And it's not what I'm wanting to do. I'm not wanting to get on here and have a political debate or a personal debate or anything else. I just want to talk about, can they? Yes, they can. Is that new? Is this something new? No, it's not. It goes back to, again, 1800s. Will the courts support somebody saying, well, I have a right to not be vaccinated? No. They haven't up to now. I'm not saying they won't, but they haven't up to now. And here recent as a couple months ago, they've shown no tendency to go against that. So, all the way back to Jacobson's case and, we've and Zucht and we've seen it over and over again in cases. So, well, I hope that answers some questions, and I hope it puts a little bit of, just relieves some of the concern about it. It's something that we anticipate. I don't think we're necessarily going to see people lose their jobs over, and I sure hope not. And that's what I really hope. I hope, again, you're in a position where what you can do, go have a dialogue with your employer. If there's some reason why you can't be vaccinated or you're concerned about it, maybe other options such as wearing a mask or something along that lines that helps us. So we'll see how that goes. And again, I hope this helps. I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. I'll monitor this throughout the day and tonight and kind of answer questions when I can in between, either meetings or tonight when I get home. And I hope this helps people understand where we stand legally speaking on whether or not you can be required by a private employer to that. And again, I said earlier that I was kind of split, because I'm always concerned about, health of the people in our community. Those, you all know, I had COVID back in December. It was no joke. no joke. And the fact that I have pneumonia, since then is a direct repercussion of the damage that, I have from having had COVID. My lungs aren't in the same shape that they were in prior to COVID. And I chose to be vaccinated after having COVID and such. So where I stand personally, but that's not meaning that I think that everybody has to believe the same way that I do. I don't think that. But we are in kind of, it is serious, and it's not something that we should be taking lightly. That's just, my personal view on it. So I kind of see where it's coming from. But at the same time, I stand there, I support businesses, and you all know I'm very conservative in my viewpoint of, businesses being able to determine, what happens within the confines of their business. So it's one of those tricky situations. So I hope we all have a little bit of patience and grace as we deal with this topic with people who may disagree with us, and go forward. So you all take care. Have a great Monday, and I will talk with you soon.